My name is Simon Brown, and the night my own daughter tried to poison me was the night I realized family could become the deadliest enemy. I watched her sprinkle a white powder into my soup, thinking I hadn't noticed. She smiled as if she were caring for me, but her eyes told a different story. What she didn't know was that I'd learned to survive traps far deadlier during my 30 years in the army. That night, I switched our plates, and what happened next changed the course of our lives forever. Before we begin, I want to ask, where are you watching from and how old are you? Please subscribe to Family Betrayal Unmasked to hear more powerful stories like this one. I still remember the moment like it happened just yesterday. I was sitting at the small kitchen table, the same one where my late wife Margaret and I used to share quiet Sunday breakfasts. My body was tired, aching from an unexplained wave of illness that had swept over me earlier that afternoon. The house was warm with the smell of chicken broth, but something in the air carried a chill that no heater could fight. That was when I saw her. My daughter Teresa, who had only returned home a month earlier, leaned over the counter with her back to me. I thought at first she was just seasoning the soup, but then from the corner of my eye, I caught the quick, deliberate flick of her wrist as she emptied a small glass vial into one of the bowls. At first, I wanted to believe my eyes were playing tricks on me. Maybe I was too tired. Maybe the pounding in my head was making me imagine things. But then I saw the white powder dissolve quickly as she stirred with sharp, efficient motions. My heart sank. It wasn't clumsy or accidental. It was practiced, calculated, and worst of all, it was meant for me. She turned, carrying both bowls, and placed one directly in front of my usual seat. Her smile was wide, too wide. "Here you go, Dad. Something gentle for your stomach." Her voice carried that honeyed sweetness she used to get out of trouble as a teenager when she'd sneak out past curfew. Only now I realized the stakes were much higher. I forced a smile, masking the storm building inside me. "Smells wonderful, sweetheart. You really do take care of me." The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but I knew better than to show my hand too soon. 30 years in the Army had taught me that survival often depended on patience and timing. When she excused herself to fetch some bread from the pantry, I moved. My body might have been weak, but muscle memory kicked in. With a single fluid motion, I slid the bowls across the counter and switched them. Less than 10 seconds. Silent, precise. By the time she returned, I was seated calmly, spoon in hand, as if nothing had happened. She placed the bread on the table, her eyes flicking to the bowl in front of me. She was waiting for me to take that first sip. I could feel it. The anticipation radiated off her like heat from an open flame. I lifted the spoon, my hand steady despite the pounding of my heart, and tasted the broth. "Perfect," I said evenly. Just what I needed. Across from me, Teresa smiled again and began to eat from her own bowl, the poisoned one. I watched her spoonful after spoonful and realized with a cold clarity that the girl I had once carried on my shoulders during thunderstorms was gone. In her place sat a woman willing to sacrifice her own father for a pile of money. And as I swallowed each spoonful of untainted broth, one thought rang louder than any other. She thought she had trapped me. But the real trap had only just begun. The soup warmed my throat, but it did nothing to ease the cold weight in my chest. Across the table, Teresa sipped carefully, her eyes darting up at me every few seconds, as if checking for signs that her plan was working. Her smile lingered, stretched too tightly across her face, and her voice, when she finally spoke, carried an edge I had not heard since she was a defiant teenager. "Feeling better already, Dad? Colors coming back to your face." I forced a nod. "Yes, much better." I kept my voice steady, but my mind was racing. Every military instinct I'd honed over decades whispered the same thing: danger. This wasn't just a daughter concerned for her father. This was a woman testing the results of something she'd put in motion. I studied her face with the same discipline I once used interrogating enemy combatants. Her lips moved in small talk, asking about my day, but her eyes betrayed her. They were too bright, too sharp, like a predator circling prey. It wasn't the look of a daughter caring for her sick father. It was calculation, waiting for the inevitable. For a moment, my mind drifted back to Margaret, my wife. She had been the bridge between Teresa's wild spirit and my rigid discipline. Without her, I had struggled to raise our daughter alone. I remembered Teresa at 16 shouting that I was too controlling, that her mother would have let her go to the party. Margaret would have calmed her down, explained things gently. I only knew how to command to protect by restriction, and it built a wall between us. That wall had never truly come down. Now watching Teresa stir her spoon absent-mindedly, I wondered if I had lost her forever. Maybe the seeds of this betrayal had been planted years ago when she left home at 18, slamming the door without a backward glance. 10 years of silence and short phone calls, then suddenly she was back on my doorstep last month, hollow-eyed and desperate. I'd let her in without question. A father's heart is quick to forgive, but tonight mine ached with the knowledge that forgiveness had not been enough. I pushed the empty bowl aside, acting as though I felt stronger. That really hit the spot. "Thank you, sweetheart." She smiled again, but this time the mask slipped for a second. In the reflection of the kitchen window, I caught her expression shift. Gone was the sweetness, replaced by something colder, harder. Her jaw tightened, her eyes narrowed, and for that fraction of a moment, she looked like a stranger standing in my kitchen. I stood slowly, pressing a hand to my stomach, as if still weak. "I think I'll lie down for a while," I said. Teresa's voice pitched higher than normal, overly cheerful. "Good idea, Dad. Rest up. You'll feel much better after dinner." But the way her eyes followed me up the stairs told me otherwise. I gripped the banister, each step heavier than the last, knowing deep down that I wasn't just climbing to my bedroom. I was climbing toward a truth no father should ever have, to face the possibility that my own daughter wanted me dead. I collapsed onto the edge of my bed, the springs groaning under my weight, as though they carried my burden too. The ache in my stomach from earlier had faded, but what replaced it was worse, a gnawing unease that made my skin prickle. The house creaked the way old houses do, but each sound tonight felt amplified, deliberate. Downstairs, I heard Teresa opening cabinets, the clatter of dishes, water running in the sink. Ordinary sounds, yet somehow sinister, as if every movement carried a hidden purpose. My eyes wandered to the nightstand where Margaret's picture rested. 10 years since cancer took her, yet I still reached for her whenever life pressed too hard. I held the frame in my hands, tracing the lines of her smile with my thumb. She had always known how to speak to Teresa when I could not. Where I saw danger, Margaret saw possibility. Where I imposed rules, she offered understanding. Without her, Teresa and I had been two broken souls living in the same house but speaking different languages. The memories rushed back unbidden. Teresa at 16, mascara smudged from crying, shouting that I hated her because I wouldn't let her go to a party. Mom would have said yes, she screamed, fists clenched at her sides. I told her I was protecting her, that she didn't understand the dangers of the world. But truthfully, I didn't know how to explain the fear of losing her the way I lost men in combat. I only knew how to command, and commands had no place in a grieving teenager's heart. A year later, she stormed out on her 18th birthday. I remember watching from this same window as she loaded her car. No hug, no backward glance, just the slam of a car door and the gravel spitting beneath her tires. That sound haunted me for years. I convinced myself she needed space to grow, to make mistakes, to find herself. The occasional birthday card with no return address, the 3-minute phone calls where she said little, and I said even less. I told myself it was enough. Then a month ago, she showed up on my doorstep with 2 suitcases and hollow eyes. "Just temporary," she said, refusing to meet my gaze. I welcomed her back without hesitation. Maybe it was guilt, maybe loneliness, or maybe just a foolish hope that we could mend what was broken. But tonight shattered that illusion. The sudden illness, the vial of white powder, the too sweet smile, it all pointed to one conclusion. My daughter hadn't come home to rebuild bridges. She had come home for something else. And if my instincts were right, that something was the inheritance I had worked my whole life to build. I rubbed my temples, forcing my breath to steady. 30 years in the army taught me one truth above all others: trust your instincts. Right now, every instinct screamed that the person moving around my kitchen downstairs was not the little girl who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms. No, she was someone else entirely, someone dangerous. And as I lay back against the pillows staring at Margaret's photograph, one question clawed at me harder than all the rest. When had my daughter stopped being my daughter? The creak of the old stairs echoed beneath my hand as I descended back toward the kitchen. Each step felt like walking into enemy territory, my palm gripping the banister as if it were the strap of a rifle. When I reached the bottom, the smell of broth hung thick in the air, comforting on the surface, but I knew better now. Comfort can be the best camouflage for danger. "Soup's ready," Dad Teresa called brightly. Too brightly. Her voice floated through the kitchen, rehearsed and hollow. I paused in the doorway, letting my eyes adjust to the glow of the overhead light. There she was, standing at the counter, shoulders hunched, stirring 2 bowls placed side by side. Steam curled upward, blurring the edges of her movements, but my focus was razor sharp. Then I saw at her hand slipping into her pocket, pulling out that same small glass vial. She tipped the contents into the left bowl with swift precision, stirring with the concentration of a chemist, mixing a deadly formula. My chest tightened. She wasn't experimenting. She'd practiced this. The vial disappeared back into her pocket, her motions smooth, almost professional. I stood frozen in the doorway, watching the woman who had once clung to me during thunderstorms now plotting my death as if it were routine. For a split second, every instinct screamed at me to shout, to demand answers, to seize her by the shoulders and shake sense into her. But 30 years in uniform had taught me that the battlefield rewards patience, not impulse. I kept my silence. She glanced over her shoulder. Almost ready. Just letting it cool. Her smile looked pasted on her voice, dripping with false cheer. I forced my legs to move, each step measured. "Smells wonderful," I said, lowering myself into my usual chair. My tone was steady, but my heartbeat thundered in my ears. "Made it just for you." She gestured toward the bowls, her eyes glittering with anticipation. "This should settle your stomach." She knew my habits, where I sat, how I ate, even the order in which I reached for the bread. She had planned this detail by detail. "Let me grab the bread," she added, turning toward the pantry. That was my chance. The moment her back disappeared behind the pantry door, I moved. My body, though weakened, still carried the reflexes of training drilled into me long ago. 3 steps to the counter, a swift exchange of bowls, 3 steps back. 10 seconds at most. When she returned, I was back in my seat, hands folded calmly on the table as if nothing had changed. She carried the bread, smiling again, oblivious to the switch. Perfect timing. She set the loaf down, slid the left bowl, the poisoned one, before her own chair, and sat down across from me. I lifted my spoon, meeting her gaze. Thank you, sweetheart. You really take care of me. She mirrored me, raising her own spoon. The irony was bitter in my throat. Every drop of poison she had meant for me now waited for her. And as the first taste touched her lips, I realized the trap she thought she had built for me had already begun to close around her. The kitchen was silent, except for the faint scrape of spoons against ceramic. Teresa blew on each sip before tasting it, her eyes flicking up to study me as if she were waiting for something to happen. I played my role, dipping my spoon into the safe broth, nodding appreciatively, even letting out a soft sigh. Just what I needed, I said, forcing a smile. She leaned forward, her anticipation barely disguised. You seem better already. Colors coming back to your cheeks. Yes, I answered, steady and calm. Much better. But inside, my thoughts churned like storm clouds. Every swallow she took was meant for me. Each spoonful carried a message sharper than any knife my daughter wanted me gone. I found myself watching her closely, searching for signs. Would her face pale first? Would she clutch her stomach the way I had earlier that afternoon? I didn't even know what she had used, but my instincts told me it wasn't something harmless. No, Teresa wasn't clumsy. Her actions were deliberate, her hand too practiced with that vial. As the minutes stretched on, I remembered her childhood in flashes. The way she'd curl up in my lap during thunderstorms, whispering, "Don't let the lightning get me, Daddy." The smell of crayons when she drew birthday cards for me with crooked hearts and misspelled words. The way her small fingers used to wrap around mine, trusting me with every ounce of her little soul. Those memories, once warm, now cut like broken glass. I swallowed another spoonful, tasting only bitterness, despite the soup's flavor. Across from me, Teresa dabbed her lips with a napkin, her smile unwavering. See, I told you it would help. I nodded, but my eyes narrowed. Yes, you've always taken care of me. The words dripped with irony, though she didn't seem to notice. The silence between us grew heavier. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway echoed like a hammer driving nails into a coffin. I felt as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. Finally, I set my spoon down, pushing the empty bowl aside. I think I should get some rest now. Let this settle. My voice was even, but my chest ached with restrained fury. Teresa smiled sweetly, gathering the dishes. Of course, Dad. I'll clean up. Sweet dreams. Her tone carried the warmth of a caring daughter, but I saw her avoid looking at her own bowl, now nearly empty. She didn't want to face what she had consumed. As I rose from the table and climbed the stairs, my legs trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of what I had just witnessed. My daughter, my flesh and blood, had calmly tried to poison me, then sat across from me eating the same soup with a smile. When I reached my room and shut the door, I pressed my forehead against the wood, my breath coming shallow. I had survived ambushes, minefields, and snipers, but nothing had prepared me for this, the moment when the enemy was not outside my home, but seated across the table wearing my daughter's face. Morning light seeped through the curtains when I finally stirred from a night of restless pacing. I hadn't slept. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Teresa's hand tipping that white powder into my bowl, her smile hiding malice. I expected to hear her moving around the house, but instead the silence pressed in heavy, almost unnatural. I made my way downstairs cautiously, every creak of the wood echoing like a gunshot in my ears. When I reached the kitchen, she was already at the table. Her skin was pale, her eyes sunken, and her hands clutched her stomach as though she were trying to hold herself together. The untouched coffee beside her had gone cold. She looked up at me with a weak, almost pleading expression. "Dad," she whispered, "something's wrong." My stomach, it's on fire. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the steam rising between us like a curtain. That's interesting, I said slowly, watching her flinch at the tone in my voice. What exactly did you put in my soup last night? Her face went whiter than it already was. She tried to laugh, a sound too brittle to be convincing. I don't know what you're talking about. I leaned against the counter, studying her the way I used to study enemy maps, searching for weak points. Think carefully, Teresa. I saw you. Every movement, every stir, every grain of powder dissolving. What was it? She shook her head violently, wincing as the motion sent pain through her body. You're paranoid. You've always been paranoid. I was just making soup. Regular soup. Then you won't mind that I switched the bowls while you went to get the bread, I said evenly. The words landed like a hammer blow. Her mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. Her hands flew from her stomach to her throat, then back again, as if she could somehow reverse what was already inside her. No. No, you didn't, she stammered. Her eyes widened, dawning horror crawling across her face. That's impossible. I took a slow sip of my coffee, never breaking eye contact. You tried to kill me, Teresa, but all you managed to do was poison yourself. Her voice cracked, rising in desperation. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I wasn't trying to. She broke off, tears brimming in her eyes as she hunched over in pain. I set the cup down, the sound sharp against the countertop. Not trying to what? Not trying to kill your own father. Not trying to cash in on the house, the pension, the insurance. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but there was no innocence in them, only fear and guilt tangled together. I needed the money, Dad. You don't understand. I thought if you got sick enough to go to the hospital, maybe have a heart attack, it would look natural. Her words cut deeper than any battlefield wound I'd ever endured. She wasn't confessing to a crime of passion. She was laying out a calculated plan, step by step, like it was nothing more than a grocery list. I straightened my voice, lower, but more dangerous. You thought wrong. Her tears fell freely now, streaking down her cheeks as she rocked back and forth, clutching her stomach. It wasn't supposed to kill you, she whispered, voice cracking. Just make you weak. Just enough so you'd go to the hospital. I thought if you were out of the way for a while, I could handle things. Handle what Teresa, my tone cut like a blade. I'd heard 100 excuses in interrogation rooms, but hearing one from my own daughter felt like acid on an open wound. What could possibly be so urgent that you'd risk murdering your own father? Her eyes darted everywhere but me. Debts, mistakes, people you don't understand. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. I didn't want to do it, Dad. Someone told me it was the only way. The words froze me. Someone told me. I stepped closer, folding my arms tightly across my chest to keep my hands from trembling. Who? She shook her head, refusing to answer. Doesn't matter. They'll come after me if I say. You don't know what they're capable of. Teresa. My voice dropped into that old command tone, the one that had made grown soldiers snap to attention. Look at me. Slowly, reluctantly, she raised her face. The girl I had raised was buried under layers of fear, shame, and something darker, manipulation. This wasn't just her doing. Someone had gotten into her head, twisted it until betrayal seemed like survival. You're not smart enough to plan this alone, I said bluntly. Her lips trembled, but she didn't argue. Whoever's behind this, he's using you, feeding you lies, making you think money's the only way out. Her silence confirmed more than words ever could. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, weighing loyalty to this unseen figure against the reality of her father, staring her down with hard truth. I sat across from her, every muscle tight, my jaw clenched so hard it ached. I spent 3 decades in the army. I know manipulation when I see it. I know when someone's been groomed to think betrayal is the only option. Whoever you've been talking to, they don't care about you, Teresa. They care about what I have. She covered her face again, muffling her words. I didn't want to do it. I swear I didn't. He said if I didn't follow through, they'd take everything anyway. There it was, the pronoun, he. I leaned back, blood pounding in my ears. The pieces were starting to align. Teresa's sudden reappearance, her questions about my finances, her insistence on cooking for me. She wasn't acting alone, and the sickness I'd felt yesterday. It hadn't been bad turkey, as she'd tried to suggest. It had been a test run. I rose from my chair, looking down at her trembling form. Teresa, you need to understand something. The moment you tried to put that poison in my bowl, you crossed a line. You might think you're protecting yourself from this man, but you've only tied yourself tighter to him. Her sobs quieted her shoulders, slumping under the weight of truth. She didn't deny it anymore, and that silence told me everything I needed to know. I left Teresa slumped at the table, her face buried in her hands, and walked into my study. The familiar smell of old books and leather normally calmed me. But this morning, it only reminded me how fragile everything I'd built really was. The desk lamp cast a cone of light across my paperwork, highlighting the details of my life pension statements, insurance policies, deeds, all the things I had worked decades for, all the things Teresa had tried to steal in one poisoned meal. I pulled open the drawer where I kept my phone and chargers. As the screen lit up, I noticed a string of texts I hadn't seen before. Unknown number, blocked ID. My gut clenched as I scrolled through them. Has he eaten yet? Make sure you don't screw this up. We need this money or you're done. Hurry, time's running out. My blood turned cold. These weren't random spam messages. They were instructions, threats, proof that Teresa wasn't acting alone. Behind me, the floor creaked. Teresa had followed, standing in the doorway like a shadow. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but there was a flash of something harder there now. Fear mixed with defiance. Who is he? I asked, holding up the phone so she could see the messages. She shook her head quickly. I don't know. Just someone I met. Don't lie to me, I snapped louder than I meant to. My voice carried the old authority that had once commanded platoons. She flinched, but didn't answer. I turned back to the screen, rereading every word. Whoever this man was, he knew my schedule. He knew my daughter had access to me. He knew my house. The thought made my skin crawl. Did he tell you to poison me? I asked, quieter now. Her lips trembled. He said it wouldn't kill you. Just make you weak so I could handle things quicker. He promised no one would suspect anything. Said it would look natural. Her voice cracked on the last word as though she knew how absurd it sounded. I stared at her, struggling to reconcile the sobbing woman before me with the girl I once tucked into bed. You think this man cares about you? I asked. He's setting you up to take the fall while he waits for the payday. When you're in prison, he'll already be gone with the money. She looked down, her silence confirming my suspicion. I walked back to my desk, opening the filing cabinet where I kept my will. The paper was yellowed at the edges from age, but one line stood out clearly: Beneficiary Teresa Brown. My throat tightened. I had built my entire life around making sure she'd be taken care of when I was gone, and she was willing to trade that future for a quicker payout with the help of some crook. I slid the will back into its folder and shut the drawer firmly. No more second chances. Whoever this man was, I would find him. And Teresa, She had just shown me she couldn't be trusted with my life, my estate, or even my forgiveness. The phone buzzed again in my hand. Another message from the unknown number. Don't let him suspect. We'll be there soon. My jaw tightened. They thought I was in the dark. They thought wrong. I sat at my desk, the phone still buzzing in my palm, and felt a clarity I hadn't felt in years. In the Army, when chaos hit, we didn't panic. We documented, we assessed, and we acted. That mindset was second nature to me, and it was time to bring it back. If Teresa and her mysterious accomplice thought I was just some frail old man ripe for the taking, they had no idea who they were dealing with. I pulled out a yellow legal pad from the top drawer and uncapped my pen. The page remained blank for only a second before I began writing in sharp, deliberate strokes. 9:47 p.m., observed Teresa adding white substance to left soup bowl. Vial approx. 2 inches tall, glass clear. Substance dissolved rapidly. Each line recorded not just what I'd seen, but how I'd seen it. The details mattered. If this went to court, if this ever came before police or lawyers, I needed my story airtight. Next, I listed her words from this morning. It wasn't supposed to kill you. Just make you weak, just enough to go to the hospital. My chest tightened as I wrote it out. Reading the words on paper made them feel colder, more calculated. This wasn't an emotional slip. It was a plan. I gathered my financial documents, pension statements, insurance policies, property deeds, and stacked them neatly. Every one of them had her name on it as beneficiary. Suddenly, I saw what I should have noticed weeks ago. Teresa's sudden interest in my health, her prying questions about my medications, her insistence on cooking for me when she'd never shown interest in the kitchen before. It all added up, and it all pointed to one thing: premeditation. I reached for the phone again, scrolling past the unknown number and pressing one I hadn't dialed in months. When the line clicked, a familiar voice answered. Emily Carter Law Offices. Emily, it's Simon Brown. I said, my voice clipped but steady. Simon. You sound upset. What's going on? My daughter tried to poison me last night, I said flatly. I have evidence and I need your help immediately. There was a long pause. Simon? Are you certain I watched her do it? I switched the bowls. She's sick this morning because of her own poison, and I've been receiving threatening texts from an unknown number connected to her. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's attempted murder. Emily's voice lowered into the professional calm I'd relied on when Margaret was sick, and we'd drawn up medical directives. Bring everything to me. 2 o'clock this afternoon. I'll make time. Good. And Emily. We're rewriting my will today. Teresa is out. Every cent goes to veterans organizations. You're sure, dead sure, I replied. After hanging up, I placed each document into a manila folder, the texts, my notes, my financial records. This wasn't just protection. This was ammunition. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the folder like it was a weapon. Because in truth, that's exactly what it was. If Teresa thought she could use poison to steal my life, she was about to learn I had other ways to strike back, ways that didn't leave fingerprints or questions, only consequences. By the time I closed the folder, the decision had already solidified in my chest like stone. There would be no turning back. For 30 years, I had believed everything I earned, from the pension to the house to the insurance, was meant to secure Teresa's future. But last night proved something I never wanted to admit. Giving her those things would not protect her. It would destroy me. I carried the folder to the kitchen, poured myself another cup of coffee, and sat down across from her. Teresa looked even worse now, gray skin, damp hair plastered to her forehead, her arms wrapped around her stomach. She glanced at me with glassy eyes, a flicker of shame buried under layers of fear. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. I set the folder on the table between us. "I already have. Emily Carter is drafting a new will today. You're out. Every asset, every account, every cent, it all goes to the veterans of foreign wars. You wanted my money so badly, you tried to kill me for it. Now you'll never see a dime." Her head snapped up, horror flashing across her face. "Dad, please, you can't. I can. And I will." My tone was calm, almost too calm. "You had your chance to be my daughter. You chose to be my enemy instead. Enemies don't inherit from me." She shook her head furiously, tears welling again. "You don't understand. If you cut me out, he'll come after me. He'll come after both of us." "Then maybe you should have thought of that before you tipped poison into my dinner," I said, my voice hardening. "You wanted me weak. You wanted me gone. Now you'll face the consequences of the people you chose to trust." For a moment, she looked like the little girl I remembered, eyes wide, trembling, desperate for forgiveness. But that image shattered the second she spat out, "You'll regret this." I leaned in, my face inches from hers. "No, Teresa, you will." The silence between us was deafening. Finally, I stood, folder in hand, and walked toward the door. "You have one more night under this roof," I said over my shoulder. "Tomorrow you're gone." Her voice cracked behind me. "Where am I supposed to go?" "Not my problem anymore," I replied. Outside, the morning air bit at my skin, sharp and cold, but it carried something I hadn't felt in days: clarity. I slid into my truck, the folder on the passenger seat, and started the engine. Every rumble of the motor felt like punctuation, a drumbeat marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I drove toward Emily's office with steady hands and a heart heavy but unshaken. For the first time since Margaret died, I felt a different kind of strength coursing through me. Not the strength of a soldier ready for battle, but the strength of a father finally done being betrayed. By the time the city skyline came into view, I knew exactly what this was. Not just protection, not just survival. This was my first act of revenge. It was late afternoon when I heard the crunch of tires on my gravel driveway. I had just finished securing the new locks and setting up the motion sensors I'd purchased that morning. My instincts told me Teresa wouldn't accept being cut out of my will quietly, and instincts like mine were rarely wrong. I set the folder of evidence on the coffee table, poured myself a glass of water, and waited. The slam of a car door, followed by another, confirmed my suspicion she wasn't alone. Through the narrow slit of the curtains, I caught my first glimpse of him. Tall, lean, with the kind of slicked-back hair that screamed arrogance. He moved with the predatory ease of a man who had spent years bullying people weaker than him. And right behind him was Teresa, her face drawn, but her eyes lit with a desperate fire. The front door rattled violently, then swung open with a force that made the frame crack. "Mr. Brown," the man called out smoothly, stepping inside without invitation. "We need to have a little conversation." I didn't stand. I remained seated in my leather armchair, hands folded in my lap, my voice calm. "Then you should have made an appointment." Teresa appeared first in the doorway, wringing her hands. "Dad, this is Hubert. We're just here to make things simple." Hubert stepped into the living room, filling the space with a false confidence I'd seen on too many con artists overseas. He carried a leather briefcase and set it heavily on the coffee table. "Transfer the house," he said flatly, "and nobody gets hurt." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that a threat?" He gave a cold smile. "A suggestion. You've made things complicated by involving lawyers. But we can still handle this like family. Sign these papers, and your daughter will get what's rightfully hers." I studied him for a long moment, then turned my eyes to Teresa. She stood stiffly beside him, her face pale, but her jaw tight. Is this really how you want this to end, Teresa? I asked. Her lips quivered. Dad, just sign, please. You don't understand what's at stake. The irony nearly made me laugh. She thought I didn't understand. But I had already seen the texts already connected. The dots already built my case. What they didn't know was that the hidden cameras in the corners of the room were recording every word, every gesture. My house wasn't just a home anymore. It was a trap. Hubert leaned forward, his voice dropping into menace. Don't be foolish, old man. You're alone. No one will believe you over us. I took a sip of water, keeping my hand steady. Funny thing about that, I said evenly. Illinois is a one-party consent state. I've already given my consent. His confident smile faltered, if only for a moment. He glanced around the room, eyes narrowing, as if he were trying to spot the cameras. Teresa's breath hitched beside him. The battlefield had shifted, and though they didn't know it yet, the ambush they thought they'd planned for me had already turned on them. Hubert's eyes narrowed as he straightened his polished facade, cracking just enough for me to see the temper simmering beneath. He tapped the briefcase with a thick finger. These are legal documents, he said with an oily confidence. All you need to do is sign and we can put this ugliness behind us. Teresa gets her inheritance, you keep your dignity, and I walk out of here without any unpleasantness. I leaned back in my chair, hands resting calmly on the armrests. Inheritance, I repeated. You mean the money you plan to steal after murdering me? His smile returned, but this time it was sharper, like a knife that had already drawn blood. Murder. That's a strong word, Mr. Brown. It was just a little medication, something to help you feel cooperative. Unfortunately, your daughter mixed up the dosage. Teresa winced, looking down at the floor. I caught the flicker of shame in her expression, but she stayed silent. Hubert was running the show now, and she was too deep in his pocket to speak. I set my glass of water on the table, deliberately, the clink echoing in the tense silence. You can spin it however you like, but I watched her pour that poison into my soup. I've written every detail down word for word, and now, thanks to your loose tongue, I've got recordings too. His jaw tightened. Recordings won't help you. You think a judge is going to side with some paranoid old soldier over a loving daughter and her fiancé? You'll look like the bitter one, senile, angry, incapable of handling your own affairs. That's the narrative we'll give them. And believe me, we're very good at selling stories. I let his words hang in the air for a moment, then gave a slow, deliberate smile. You've already sold your story to my cameras. I gestured toward the ceiling corners. His eyes followed, and for the first time since he entered, his mask slipped completely. Teresa gasped softly. Dad, you didn't— Oh, I did, I said firmly. Every word you've spoken since you kicked down my door is on video. Every threat, every confession, every slip of the tongue. You just admitted you supplied the poison. That's more than enough to bury both of you. Hubert's face hardened. His charm was gone, now replaced by naked anger. He leaned down, his shadow falling across me. You think this little game makes you safe? It doesn't. Accidents happen. Old men fall downstairs, forget to turn off their gas stoves. Nobody would question it. I met his glare without flinching. Maybe, but not while I'm alive to tell my story. And make no mistake, I'm still alive. The clock in the hallway chimed the hour, its hollow sound slicing through the tension. Teresa's hands shook as she wrung them together, her eyes darting from Hubert to me, trapped between fear and regret. Hubert, on the other hand, clenched his fists, pacing like a caged predator who had realized the prey had teeth of its own. He wanted me to break, to cave under the pressure, but I'd faced down far worse men in deserts and jungles halfway across the world. This wasn't fear anymore, it was war. And he'd just stepped onto my battlefield. Hubert's pacing stopped, and he suddenly leaned in close, the kind of move meant to intimidate. His breath carried the faint sting of expensive cologne mixed with stale anger. "Sign the papers," he growled, "or I promise you won't like what comes next." Teresa's voice broke through the tension, shaky but urgent. "Dad, just do it. Please. It doesn't have to be this way." I turned my eyes on her, steady as stone. "The moment you poured poison into my food, Teresa, you stopped being my daughter." My words were low, deliberate, and I meant every one of them. Her face crumpled as though I'd struck her, but I couldn't let the flicker of pity sway me. Compassion had no place here, not when my own life hung in the balance. Hubert slammed a fist on the coffee table, rattling the glasses. "You think you're some kind of hero? You're a stubborn old man sitting in a chair while the world passes you by. Nobody's coming to save you." I raised an eyebrow, calm as ever. "Funny you should say that." He sneered. "What you called your lawyer again, she won't be able to protect you when you're 6 feet under." I leaned slightly to the right, letting my fingers brush the underside of the armrest. The small button was there, hidden, waiting. I'd had the system installed that very morning. My thumb pressed it without hesitation. The silent alarm engaged, sending a signal directly to the police. Keeping my expression unreadable, I sat back. 30 years in the army taught me a lot of things, Hubert. Chief among them, never fight an enemy on his terms. You're in my house on my battlefield, and you've already lost. Teresa's eyes widened. She looked from me to Hubert, her lips trembling. "Dad, what did you do?" I answered evenly. "I ensure justice will walk through that door any moment now." Hubert laughed, a harsh bark with no humor in it. "You're bluffing. If you'd really called the cops, they'd already be here." The distant wail of sirens cut through his words like a blade through paper. It started faint, then grew louder, closer, undeniable. Teresa covered her mouth with both hands, panic flooding her face. Hubert's bravado faltered for the first time, his eyes darting toward the window where red and blue lights began flickering against the curtains. I stayed seated, steady as granite. "Looks like my backup has arrived," Teresa whispered. "No, this can't be happening." I looked at her one last time, my voice heavy with finality. "Family doesn't try to murder each other for money. You chose your side, and now you'll face the consequences with him." The pounding of boots on my porch grew louder. Hubert swore under his breath, spinning toward the front door, but I knew it was already too late. They were here. The last thing I said before the door burst open was quiet almost to myself. "Checkmate." The door burst open with a violent crack, splinters flying as uniformed officers poured into the living room. Weapons drawn, voices commanding the air filled with authority that even Hubert couldn't match. Chicago police hands where we can see them. Hubert froze mid-step, his body rigid, then slowly raised his hands. The slick arrogance he carried like a second skin peeled away under the glare of the officers' flashlights. Teresa stood trembling beside him, her hands half-lifted, tears already streaking her cheeks. Detective Reynolds stepped in, last calm but sharp-eyed, his service weapon lowered, but ready. His gaze swept the room, the splintered doorframe, the papers on the coffee table, the two intruders caught red-handed. Then his eyes found mine. "Mr. Brown, are you all right?" I nodded once, steady. "I'm fine, Detective, but I believe you'll find plenty here to keep you busy." One of the officers cuffed Hubert, who immediately began protesting. "This is harassment, we were invited." "He's senile, doesn't know what he's talking about." Reynolds silenced him with a cold glare. "Save it for the judge." He turned to me. "Do you have evidence, sir?" I gestured to the corners of the room. Hidden cameras. They've been rolling since the moment they kicked in my door. Every threat, every word, every admission, it's all on record. Teresa's voice cracked, pleading now. Dad, please, you can't do this. We can work it out. I didn't mean I cut her off, my voice like iron. Family doesn't poison each other, Teresa. You made your choice. An officer guided her forward, cuffs clicking shut around her wrists. She sobbed, struggling against the metal, but didn't resist. Hubert, on the other hand, barked curses, thrashing, until two officers shoved him against the wall. The mask was gone now, revealing the predator underneath. Reynolds examined the documents Hubert had brought, flipping through forged property transfers and financial papers. He shook his head. Looks like we've got conspiracy to commit fraud on top of everything else. And that's before we get to attempted murder. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of the moment pressing down. I'd survived last night's poison, survived today's intimidation, and now justice was taking form right in front of me. Still, there was no satisfaction in it. Just a hollow ache where my daughter used to be. As the officers led Hubert and Teresa toward the door, Hubert threw one last barb over his shoulder. This isn't over, old man. You'll regret crossing me. I looked him dead in the eye, my voice calm as stone. The only thing I regret is letting you through my door in the first place. The red and blue lights painted the living room walls, flickering across family photos that suddenly felt like relics of another life. I watched silently as they disappeared into the night, cuffed and defeated. Reynolds lingered a moment longer, his expression respectful. You handled yourself well, Mr. Brown. Not many men could have kept their composure under this kind of pressure. I gave a slow nod. 30 years in the army teaches you one thing: never lose your head when the enemy's at your door. And tonight, that lesson had kept me alive. I stood in the doorway leaning against the frame as the officers guided Hubert and Teresa out into the night. The flashing red and blue lights splashed across their faces, his twisted with fury, hers streaked with tears. Neighbors had gathered along the sidewalk, their silhouettes illuminated by the glow, whispering among themselves as the spectacle unfolded. It wasn't just an arrest, it was a public unmasking. Hubert barked at the officers, his voice sharp with panic. You don't know who I am, this old fool's lying. You'll regret this. His threats echoed down the street, but the cuffs rattling against his wrists told a different story. He wasn't in control anymore. Teresa, though, was different. She didn't shout. She didn't fight. She simply walked between the officers, her shoulders slumped, her eyes locked on me. For a fleeting second, I saw the little girl she once was, clutching a teddy bear and begging me to keep the monsters away during a thunderstorm. Only now she wasn't afraid of monsters outside the house. She had become one inside it. Dad, she whispered as they reached the squad car, her voice cracking through the noise. Please, don't let them take me. We can fix this. The words pierced me deeper than I wanted to admit. Every instinct in me, every part of my father's heart, wanted to rewind time, to hold her again, to find the daughter I'd lost. But there are some betrayals you can't walk back from, not when they're laced with poison. I stepped forward, just enough so she could hear me clearly over the commotion. My voice was calm, steady, but heavy with finality. You stopped being my daughter when you chose money over blood. Her knees buckled, and for a moment the officers had to steady her. She shook her head, tears spilling freely now. I'll never forgive you for this. I met her gaze, letting her see the steel in my eyes. I've already forgiven myself for protecting others from you. The officers lowered her into the back seat, the door shutting with a hollow thud that felt like the closing of a chapter I'd never wanted to write. Hubert was shoved into another car, still cursing and spitting empty threats. The engines rumbled to life, tires crunching over gravel, and one by one the squad cars pulled away, carrying my daughter and her accomplice toward the justice they had earned. The street grew quiet again, the flashing lights fading into the distance. All that remained was the echo of her words and the emptiness settling over my home. For a long time I just stood there staring at the night sky, the cool air filling my lungs. 30 years of service had shown me how fragile life could be, how quickly loyalty could turn to betrayal. But I had never imagined that lesson would come from my own blood. Tonight, it had. I closed the front door slowly, the silence inside pressing heavier than ever. My home was secure, my life intact, but my family, at least the one I'd been born with, was gone. 3 weeks later, I found myself sitting in the witness chair of Cook County Courthouse. The sterile smell of polished wood and old paper filled the air, the kind of scent that clings to government buildings and lingers in memory. The room was hushed, every cough, every shuffle echoing against the high ceilings. In front of me, Judge Martinez presided, her sharp eyes sweeping across the courtroom with the authority of someone who had heard every excuse and every lie imaginable. On my right, Teresa sat at the defense table. She looked smaller somehow, her shoulders hunched, her once bright eyes dulled by sleepless nights and prison garb. She wouldn't meet my gaze, though I felt her trying. On her left was Hubert, still clinging to arrogance, his suit pressed, his posture defiant. But even from here I could see the cracks, the twitch of his jaw, the restless tapping of his foot, the way he avoided the jury's eyes. The prosecutor's voice cut through the stillness. "Mr. Brown, can you tell the court what you witnessed on the evening in question?" I cleared my throat, my hands steady on the rail. I watched my daughter pour a white substance from a vial into a bowl of soup. She placed that bowl at my usual seat at the table. When she left the room, I switched the bowls. Later, she consumed the soup herself. Gasps rippled through the jury box. The prosecutor nodded, prompting me to continue. I documented everything that night, times words, actions. I recorded video from hidden cameras I had installed in my home. Those cameras captured her accomplice, Mr. Hubert Klein, entering my house with her days later. They threatened me, demanded I sign fraudulent property transfer papers, and admitted to the poisoning attempt. All of this is now evidence. The prosecutor held up a thick folder, the very one I had built, line by line. These records, ladies and gentlemen, corroborate Mr. Brown's testimony. Along with the video and audio recordings, they paint a clear picture of premeditated conspiracy. Hubert slammed his fist on the table, startling the room. "This is nonsense, he's making it up." The bailiff barked at him to sit down, and the judge's gavel struck sharply. "Order, Judge Martinez," demanded. Her eyes cut to Hubert. "You will remain silent unless spoken to." I looked at Teresa then. For the first time, her eyes met mine. They were wet, glistening with something I couldn't quite place, regret, fear, maybe both. But whatever it was, it came too late. The prosecutor's final question was simple. "Mr. Brown, do you believe your daughter and Mr. Klein intended to harm you?" I drew a slow breath. "Yes. They intended to poison me, steal my home, and strip away everything I worked for. My daughter was willing to trade her father's life for money. And Mr. Klein was the man who convinced her it was the only way." The courtroom fell silent, every word hanging in the air like a verdict of its own. I leaned back slightly, my duty done. The truth was now out in the open where it belonged. After stepping down from the witness chair, I joined my attorney Emily Carter at the polished oak table reserved for our side. The prosecutor had done his part. Now it was time for mine. Emily slid a thick set of papers toward me, her expression calm but resolute. "Simon," she whispered, "once you sign these, it's permanent. There's no undoing it." I nodded, my eyes fixed on the bold heading at the top. Last Will and Testament of Simon Brown. Permanent was exactly what I wanted. The judge adjusted her glasses, her tone firm. "Mr. Brown, you've requested the court witness the execution of your revised will. Please state your intentions clearly for the record." I stood, my voice steady. "Yes, Your Honor. I am removing my daughter Teresa Brown from my will in every capacity. She will receive nothing, not the house, not the pension, not the life insurance. Instead, all of my assets will be transferred to the Veterans of Foreign Wars organization." Gasps rippled through the gallery. I felt Teresa's eyes burning into me, but I didn't turn to look. For once, this wasn't about her. It was about protecting what was left of my life's work. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Brown, is this decision made of your own free will without coercion?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said firmly. "This is my choice." Emily placed a pen in my hand. I signed each page slowly, deliberately, feeling the weight of every stroke. Decades of service, years of sacrifice, countless nights alone after Margaret passed, all of it condensed into this moment, this act of severing. As the final signature dried, I exhaled. It felt like laying a headstone on the grave of what used to be my family. From the defense table, Teresa's voice cracked. "Dad, please, don't do this. I made a mistake. I was desperate. You can't erase me like this." For the first time, I looked at her. Her eyes were wide, pleading, but there was no sincerity in them, only panic. "Teresa," I said, my voice low but carrying through the courtroom, "you erased yourself the night you tried to poison me." Her face twisted with anguish, but I forced myself to hold steady. If I faltered now, everything would unravel. The judge tapped her gavel lightly. "The will revision is entered into record. Effective immediately, Teresa Brown is removed from all beneficiary designations. The estate of Simon Brown is hereby designated to the Veterans of Foreign Wars." Emily rested a reassuring hand on my arm. "It's done, Simon. She can't touch a cent now." I nodded, my throat tightening. "Good. That money will serve men and women who understand honor, not those who throw it away." Across the aisle, Hubert muttered something under his breath. His arrogance dimmed, but not extinguished. Teresa sobbed quietly, the sound cutting through me like broken glass. But I didn't let it sway me. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt both heavier and lighter. I had lost a daughter, yes, but I had gained something else: control over the legacy Margaret and I had built. It wouldn't be wasted on betrayal. It would serve a cause that mattered. That was justice, not just for me, but for every veteran who had ever been left behind. When the gavel struck and the courtroom emptied, I walked out into the crisp Chicago air with Emily at my side. The city buzzed with its usual chaos: horns, blaring footsteps, rushing voices spilling out of open cafes, but to me, it all sounded muted, as if the world had pulled a veil over itself. I had just erased my only child from my legal life, and the weight of that decision sat heavy on my chest. Emily glanced at me as we walked down the courthouse steps. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently. I paused, watching people pass by, families laughing together, parents holding their children's hands. For a moment, a pang of envy stabbed me. "I'm alive," I said finally. And sometimes that's enough. Back home, the house felt different. The silence was no longer threatening, but it wasn't comforting either. Margaret's picture still smiled from the mantel, the same way she had on the day we married, her eyes carrying warmth I hadn't felt in years. I stood there for a long time, speaking to her in my head. "I hope I did right, Margaret. I hope cutting her off was what you would have wanted too." The truth is, blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. I had learned that the hard way. But honor, shared struggle, respect, those could build bonds stronger than family. I thought of the veterans I had served with, men and women who had stood shoulder to shoulder with me in places where trust meant survival. Not one of them would have ever betrayed me for $1. That night I sat on the porch, sipping black coffee, the hum of the neighborhood settling around me. Bill Martinez from across the street walked over carrying a chessboard under his arm. "Figured you could use a game," he said with a smile. I let out a dry chuckle. I suppose I could. As we set the pieces on the board, Mrs. Patterson from next door came by with a plate of cookies. "Fresh from the oven," she said warmly, placing them on the table. I looked at these people, neighbors, not blood, and realized they had shown me more kindness in a single evening than Teresa had in years. We played chess, shared cookies, and for the first time in a long time, the house echoed with voices that weren't laced with deceit. I understood then what Margaret might have told me if she were still here. Sometimes the family you choose matters more than the family you're born into. When the game ended, Bill clapped me on the shoulder. "You're not alone, Simon. Don't forget that." I nodded, staring at the board, the black king toppled by my white queen. A checkmate just like the one I had delivered in my living room. Only this time, the victory wasn't about survival. It was about moving forward. For the first time since the poisoning, I felt something stir in my chest. Not relief, not triumph, but the faint beginning of peace. 6 months after the trial, life had settled into a rhythm I hadn't known I needed. Mornings were filled with walks along quiet Florida streets, afternoons with volunteer work at the VA hospital, evenings with chess matches against Bill Martinez on his back porch. The anger that once clawed at me had dulled into something steadier, something closer to acceptance. But then the letter arrived. It was plain, no return address, postmarked from Joliet Correctional Center. My stomach tightened before I even opened it. I didn't need to see the shaky handwriting on the envelope to know who it was from. Teresa. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she had once slipped poison into my soup, and unfolded the letter. Her words spilled across the page in uneven lines. "Dad, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. Prison has stripped me of everything, my pride, my illusions, my excuses. I see now how wrong I was. I fell in with the wrong people, listened to the wrong man, and betrayed the only parent who ever cared for me. I'm sorry. I want a second chance to be your daughter. Please don't turn your back on me forever." I set the paper down my hands, trembling not from age but from the storm inside me. I could almost hear her voice in those words, the same voice that used to beg me to let her go to parties, the same voice that once called me daddy with absolute trust. For a long time I just sat there staring at Margaret's photo on the mantel. What would she have done? Margaret had always been the bridge, the forgiving one. But even she had limits. Betrayal as deep as this wasn't something you patched over with apologies. My mind replayed every moment, Teresa's hand tipping the vial, her anticipation, as she watched me lift the spoon, her lies, her threats, her alliance with Hubert. And finally, her words in court, "I'll never forgive you." Forgiveness is a powerful thing, but so is self-preservation. And I had to ask myself, was forgiving her really an act of love, or just another invitation for her to harm me again? I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and walked it to the cabinet in my study. Inside was a file where I kept every legal document tied to the case, my notes, the court transcripts, the revised will. I placed the letter on top and closed the drawer with a quiet click. It wasn't anger that guided me. It was clarity. Some bridges once burned aren't meant to be rebuilt. That night, as the Florida sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. Bill waved from across the street, and Mrs. Patterson stopped by with her Tuesday cookies. Their simple kindness reminded me of something Teresa never seemed to understand. Family isn't about blood. It's about loyalty, trust, and love freely given. And as I sipped my coffee, I knew one thing with certainty: I didn't need Teresa's apology to move on. My peace had already begun. The months rolled on, and I found myself settling into a life I never would have imagined. Back when Teresa first knocked on my door with those 2 suitcases, Florida was warm, forgiving in its own way. The mornings began with the call of seabirds, afternoons with the gentle hum of neighbors tending their gardens. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder inside my own home. At the VA hospital, I spent hours each week sitting with veterans who carried their own scars, some visible, others buried so deep you could only sense them in the silence. Many of them were older like me, estranged from children or family, wondering if they'd wasted their lives on people who didn't care. I never told them all the details of what happened with Teresa, but I didn't need to. My presence, my willingness to listen was enough, and in return, I found purpose again. One afternoon, a younger vet asked me, "How do you keep going when your own blood turns against you?" His eyes searched mine, desperate for an answer. I thought about it for a moment, then told him the truth. "You remember that blood doesn't make a family. Loyalty does. Love does. And sometimes the family you choose can heal wounds the family you were born with left behind." That night, I came home to find Mrs. Patterson had left a pie on my doorstep, a note taped to the box. "Thank you for everything you do for the community." Simple words, but they filled me with a warmth my daughter's letter never could. I still kept Margaret's photo by my bedside. I talked to her more often now, not out of grief, but gratitude. "We built a good life," I told her one evening, watching the sunset bleed across the Florida sky. "Even if Teresa threw it away, I'm making sure the rest of it counts for something." The veterans of foreign wars had already put my donation to use, creating a program to help seniors recognize signs of financial manipulation and elder abuse. Emily called one evening to update me. "Simon, your story is making a difference. People are learning to spot the danger before it's too late." Her words carried a weight I hadn't expected. They gave meaning to my pain. Every Thursday night, Bill and I played chess on his porch. He teased me for losing more often than I should, but I didn't mind. Losing a game of chess was nothing compared to winning back my peace. Sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, I thought about Teresa. I wondered if prison had truly changed her, or if she was still blaming me for everything. But those thoughts passed quickly, replaced by the laughter of my neighbors, the gratitude of the veterans I worked with, and the knowledge that I had survived, not just a poisoning, but a betrayal that could have broken me. I hadn't just survived, I had rebuilt. And in that rebuilding, I found a truth I wished I'd understood sooner. Peace doesn't come from what you inherit, but from what you give back. Looking back, I realized survival was never the real victory. The real victory was refusing to let betrayal define me. My daughter's actions broke something I can never repair. But they also opened my eyes to a truth too many parents learn too late. That love without respect is dangerous, and trust without accountability is deadly. I gave Teresa every opportunity to be my family, but in the end, she chose greed over blood. And I chose peace over poison. If there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's this: family isn't always the people you share a name with. Sometimes family is the neighbor who checks in on you, the friend who shows up when you're sick, or the community that rallies to protect you. Blood alone doesn't earn loyalty, it's actions that do. So I say this to every parent listening: if you're pouring your heart into someone who only gives you pain in return, don't be afraid to protect yourself. Don't let guilt chain you to betrayal. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to close a door, no matter how heavy it feels. Now, I want to ask you, have you ever faced a betrayal in your own family? How did you handle it? And what did you learn from it? Share your thoughts in the comments. If my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for listening.